Hello, and welcome to the Manga and Anime Superhero Panel, part of Superhero Fiction's Convention of Heroes. My name is Nancy O'Toole, and I am so excited to get to talk about two of my favorite topics today, which is superheroes and anime. Now, when people think about superheroes, our first thoughts tend to be the stories and characters created by Marvel and DC Comics. But that doesn't mean that those are the only types of superhero stories that are available for us to enjoy. Manga or Japanese comics and their animated counterpart anime are both filled with a variety of amazing stories, including superhero stories. Today, as fans of manga and anime, we're going to delve into the ways that superheroes and superpowers are explored, and perhaps we can learn something from them here in the West. But before we jump into the topic, I want to give everyone on the panel a chance to introduce themselves and tell us a bit about their work. So let's start off with Lou.
Hi, I'm Lou, and I have written Villainous, and Villainous is about a hero who's a part of the Hero Alliance who goes out on a mission and captures this villain that they've been tracking for the last several months, and it turns out to have been their best friend / ex whatever that they were when they were younger.
Those are my favorite types of relationships in superhero fiction. I'm not going to lie. Krista, what about you?
Hi, I'm Krista Tomlinson. I am a romance author. I published my first superhero romance, which is Blaze, Our City Guardians #1. I published that the end of 2019, and my second one should be coming up soon. I'm definitely an anime and fan, so my first I would say that I ever watched probably Sailor Moon. So so that's where I come from both, as I enjoy both anime and Western style superheroes.
Awesome. What about you, Sophia?
Hi, I'm Sophia. I am also a romance author. I self-published my first contemporary series this year, and now I'm segueing into releasing my first superhero romance in August. It's definitely got a lot of anime and manga influence, so that comes into play with a lot of those tropes that you see kind of repeated in romance animes, especially shoujo mangas. And I also was first introduced with Sailor Moon, but I gotta say that the one that really shaped me growing up was Inuyasha, and staying up late at night watching that. So since we're throwing that out there.
Oh, definitely. Same here. Huge Inuyasha fan. That was one of my first anime. So let's actually start off with that. Let's go back and talk about how you first got into anime or manga. Was there a particular series or film that really turned you into a fan? Apparently it's Sailor Moon for a couple people on the panel. And then bringing us back into the present, do you have a personal favorite show right now that's superhero or otherwise? And let's start with Sophia this time.
Yeah, so I guess my earliest memory is being like 4 years old, 3 or 4 years old, and I remember my mom taking me to the mall to buy Sailor Moon dolls. I had no idea what was going on. I just remember watching, and it's like pretty dresses, pretty transformations, all that stuff, but I had all the merchandise. I was obsessed. And then, I don't know, like 5, 6 years old, when I got my first TV in my bedroom, stayed up late at night, and the first episode of Inuyasha I ever saw, spoiler alert, was when Sango's brother gets possessed and killed. So 5-year-old me, more or less traumatized, but also it's like a car wreck and you can't look away. So I was hooked, and I was watching Adult Swim's anime block, all the way through elementary, middle, and high school, watching Toonami, all that stuff. And now as an adult, I'd have to say my current favorite superhero anime, in case you couldn't tell, Miraculous Ladybug. It's not traditional anime, but because of a lot of factors and what went into it and creating it and all that stuff, a lot of people consider it an honorary anime. So I'm here to represent.
Nice. You just made me feel really old that you watched that Inuyasha when you were so young. When I got into it when I was like 17. But anyways, let's move on. Lou, what about you? What was your first anime, and what do you enjoy now?
So my first anime was Sailor Moon. So apparently we're all Sailor Moon fans here. And I don't really have a current favorite because I binge them so quickly, but I did just finish Skater the Infinity the other day, and that was really adorable. It was so cute.
Nice. What about you, Krista?
So as I mentioned, Sailor Moon was my first anime. I watched it as a kid originally, and then watched it, and I didn't realize I was watching anime. I just knew it was just a cute cartoon, and then I started to watch it again in my kind of early 20s, and then I kind of lost track of anime for a while, and then let's say within the last 5 or 6 years or so, since everything is so easily accessible with Crunchyroll and Funimation and stuff like that, I really started to get back into it. So definitely watching the Sailor Moon Crystal. I haven't watched the new movie yet. I need to get on that. And then I think my favorite probably anime is probably Attack on Titan, just because it's just so doggone intense. It's like it's like everything is life or death on that show, and the music is wonderful. I love the music for it. And then of course, probably also My Hero Academia. There's so much going on that show as well. So I'm behind on this season, but I need to get caught up. But those are my two favorites right now.
Yeah, huge MHA fan here. I have a podcast, as I think not on this panel, but I've mentioned before, all about MHA. So anyone that wants to talk about MHA, I'm a big fan of that. So let's get into the sort of the meat of the conversation. Let's start to talk about superheroes and anime. So as mentioned back at the start, thanks to decades of comics, movies, and television shows, when you mention superheroes, people's first instinct is probably to think about like Spider-Man or Wonder Woman. But that doesn't mean that our favorite superhero elements can't be found in anime or manga as well. They're just not always explored in the ways that we have come to expect. How have some of your favorite anime and manga series explored concepts like superpowers, super teams, costumes, secret identities? And feel free to think outside of the box on this one. Like, aren't magic girls basically superheroes? Mm-hmm. And we'll start with Krista.
Well, for me, one show that I watched recently was Tiger and Bunny, and I don't know if you guys have seen that one. It's a superhero anime, and basically on this one they're kind of like corporate superheroes. So they're sponsored by a company, and the company provides them with their costumes and everything. And as they're on this team, they're also competing with each other. So throughout this TV season, because everything is televised, they earn points for the amount of people that they save and things like that, the villains they defeat. So it's completely different from what we're used to seeing, where we might have with the Avengers or the X-Men, they're on the team, but they're doing it, basically either for a country or for the good of doing something. And then, or you might have like the individual, like Batman or Spider-Man, who are doing their own thing. But here with Tiger and Bunny, they're corporate sponsors, so they have to do things a particular way. They have to be able to use particular powers. Their sponsor will tell them, hey, you didn't use that, your one superpower today, you need to make sure you do that next time. And they have to say their catchphrases each time, before they, as like, there's one, I forget her name exactly, but she's like an ice princess type, and she has to say this whole spiel before she can even start fighting. And so she gets really irritated with having to do that. And so I really like the fact that they were really playing with making superheroes corporate and sponsored, because I mean, that's what it's like for us as a consumer. We're consuming everything from them, but we're not demanding that they do that. But here, they're actually demanding that they do everything to satisfy the public and make the public excited to watch them. So I thought that was a really cool play on the superhero genre.
It's kind of like superheroes as influencers. So what about you, Sophia? What do you think?
It's really weird when you start to think about it, because obviously there's this huge trend in anime now to be very, I guess, Western superhero inspired. Like you have My Hero Academia, One Punch Man. I mean, they got the costumes, the names, the gimmicks, the tapes, everything. But when you really think about it, a bulk of a lot of action, adventure, and even romance anime could fall into that litmus test of a superhero anime. Like it would check all the boxes. I mean, you have mecha, like do mech suits count as superheroes? Does Roger from Big O count as a superhero because he's essentially Batman, but without all the tech and gadgets on his person, he hops in Big O and saves the day. So it's really weird when you start to think about it. I mean, Inuyasha technically counts, but would you look at the group of super people in Inuyasha next to a picture of the Avengers, and would the average person say, oh yeah, that's a superhero, piece of media? But it is. It's going to check pretty much all the same boxes as any Avengers storyline would check, maybe with extra time travel. I don't know. So it's just weird to think about how it's not as cut and dry as Western media, where we can see those markers right up front with the masks and the capes and the costumes, versus an anime where anything and everything could technically count.
Yeah, I definitely agree, especially as someone that came to superheroes sort of maybe a little later in life, and came to anime first. As I started to get into superheroes, I noticed aspects of the anime that I had already been watching, and I'm like, oh, I'm kind of already watching this, but it's just different. What about you, Lou? How do you feel?
I actually agree with you guys and I was thinking about this earlier, and I said this to you, Nancy, as I was going over the questions, I was trying to think of all the superhero anime I had seen. I was like, I can only think of My Hero, off the top of my head. And I started scrolling through my Funimation queue, and I was like, oh, wait, Bungo Stray Dogs kind of picks up a little bit of the superhero genre. And then I had watched, because, during COVID, I was really bored. I went through a bunch of different anime on Funimation, and I watched Rolling Girls, which is kind of like Sailor Moon in that they have these crystals that give them superpowers, and then they can fight, and they have the costumes and the names and everything, but it centers around one of the superheroes' little sister and her trying to gather these crystals and figure out what they're all about, even though they're having... I think it's the first episode. The first episode starts with these two girls fighting and tearing up this amusement park, and they're both in their suits and they have their names and everything. And then it's about the little sister following the trail of these crystals and figuring out why do they give these girls powers? What does it do? And then you find out that it's aliens, because it's always aliens. Spoiler alert! It's always aliens.
Well, the Steven Spielberg.
Yeah, always aliens.
Exactly. I notice, especially as mentioned, the Magic Girls definitely feel a lot of superheroes sometimes. I recently rewatched Cardcaptor Sakura, and I'm like, wait a minute, she has a secret identity, and she has costumes, and she has powers. So definitely superheroes. Going on to our next question, as superhero stories have become more and more popular around the world, kind of like Sophia was talking about earlier, we've gone from having anime that's superhero-esque, has superhero elements, to anime that is specifically about superheroes. But while shows like My Hero Academia and One Punch Man may have the costumes and the code names, they still feel distinctly different from the media that's found here in the West. What are some different ways that superheroes are being explored in anime versus, in Western comics and movies? And let's start with Sophia this time.
Well, I can really only speak to... I tried starting My Hero Academia, and I'm going to have to give it another shot, but I can really speak to One Punch Man. And I think the biggest difference with One Punch Man is that it's a self-aware parody of the superhero genre. Yeah. For those who don't know, One Punch Man, or Saitama, literally can defeat every villain with one punch. So not to give anything away, but every battle, every enemy he comes up against, they build the villain's got the monologue, and all the other heroes around him have their, growth moment where they're doing I can do it. Even when I'm down, I'm going to get back up and keep fighting. And then Saitama's just like, boop, and he gets it. And every single time you're like, there's no way, maybe this is the guy that actually, forces Saitama to have to confront that he's not invincible. And then he still ends up defeating them with one punch anyway. So it's really funny in how it explores all those superhero tropes, especially with the monologuing and the backstories, the tragic backstories for every other hero. And then Saitama's just along for the ride. He's kind of like the center point that everyone else revolves around with their own stories, but he's so indifferent and so nihilistic. It's really funny. I can't recommend it enough, but you don't really see anything like that in Western media that can compare.
Saitama is the best, and especially the self-awareness is what's really interesting about that show. Not only of superhero shows, but of fighting anime and stuff like that, and sort of the way it comments on the trends there. But yeah, that's such a fun show.
If you've seen Gurren Lagann, they do a good self-awareness play on fighting genre of anime too, and that's really.
Yeah. So what do you think, Lou?
So, first of all, My Hero was really hard to get into. My brother dragged me kicking and screaming, and I had to watch like the first 5 episodes before I was hooked. It was very hard. But other than that, like the difference between Western and Eastern superheroes, for me at least, I had this discussion earlier with somebody else, was I don't particularly care about the action scenes, which I know is a little counterintuitive. I know, but the explosions and the action scenes, I don't care. They bore me. It's horrible. I care about the plot and I care about the characters. And I feel like with anime and manga, they do a little more of like, here's this weird kid who has this superpower and he still kind of has to like pass English and have a social life at the same time that he's saving the world. And we don't do enough of that in Western superheroes, I feel like. And that kind of, I find that more interesting than the action and explosions, is these weird little moments where they're like, oh, I need to, my English essay is going to have to wait because somebody's coming to get the world.
Yeah, Lou, we're going to have another conversation about you in this fight scene thing. I cannot relate to that at all, but I don't know, maybe that's me.
It's weird. I don't know.
I agree, though. I think the humanity can be more interesting. Like,
Yeah.
they're people with powers, not superheroes with problems. Yeah.
I like that. What about you, Krista? What do you feel?
I think that, like she was saying, like Lou was saying, that they do tend to really delve into not just backstory, because I mean, we all know Batman's backstory with the pearls, and we all know Spider-Man's backstory with Uncle Ben. But with the anime, like Sailor Moon and My Hero, we see them going through becoming a hero. It's not just, I woke up on Wednesday, I got bit by a spider, and now I'm out there doing my thing as a superhero. So I feel like and I don't know if it's because we, as pop culture in general, already know them so well that there's not really anything left to explore with that. I mean, audiences might not want to see, Peter Parker go through, having to really delve into what it's like to learn and grow and how to be a superhero. We'll have a montage that lasts for about a minute, as him learning his powers, and then that's it. Whereas with My Hero or Sailor Moon, you see them learning every single different thing that they have to know how. I mean, Usagi has to learn all of her calls, and she has to build her team, and so she has to, it's step by step by step by step by step, throughout the series. And with My Hero, they're actually in school training to be a superhero, and we don't really see that as much, especially since in Western media, our superheroes tend to be adults. They're already, 20-something years old. So it would be a little weird to see them sitting at a desk taking notes on how to be, a hero, because, God, have you already graduated high school? Shouldn't you have had a job already before? What are you doing? So it would be a little weird to kind of see that because they're already adults, whereas with anime, we tend to start off with them as kids, which can also be kind of a weird issue because we're always depending on children to save the world. So that's, it's a lot of pressure for these low, 14 and 15 year olds to be out there doing this. But I think that that's a big difference between the two, is that we tend to see the build up from the children growing and becoming adults. And with Westernists, they're already grown. And so we get a montage and then they're out there just doing it. And so I don't know that, I think Western audiences would have to kind of get used to seeing that, because they're, we're used to getting the action and the explosions and seeing the tight superhero suits, and that's what we're used to. So we're going to have to, really kind of understand why we would start so far back in that backstory, because we all joke about Batman's pearls every time they do another movie. We don't want to see that anymore. So, we would have to kind of get used to seeing them build that character from the beginning to where they are now. So
oh yeah, there's a complete difference between having the origin story and then sort of then the character is mostly the same until they decide they want to shake things up a bit, but for the most part they remain the same. And to have a story that is specifically focused on power progression and that growth into becoming a hero and gaining new abilities and stuff like that. And that, I think, is something that, you don't see as much. That's a really good point. You don't see that as much in sort of the Western superhero stories. It looks like we have a question that has come in. Let's see. So Lou mentioned a bit of a story shift from what we see in Western superheroes. Does anime and manga treat the superpowers the same, or does hierarchy of importance in the story building different? So the question is focusing specifically on superpowers. Does anyone want to tackle that?
Yeah, I'll mention it just to start off. Both Lou and Sophia mentioned that My Hero was hard to get into. I didn't feel like it was hard to get into for me. I was definitely hooked from the first episode, but I did think it was weird. They have the weirdest powers on My Hero. Like you've got a horn come out of your head, and so that means you can shoot sparkles or something. Like, what? Yeah. What is this? Like, they're so different and so weird from the normal powers. We're used to just like, being the flying brick, or you've got this spider stuff, or you've got technology, or you have a suit. Like, that's pretty much what we're used to, right? Whereas My Heroes, like, they've got so many different weird powers that they can do, and a lot of time it's kind of works with the plot. Like, we need somebody who does fire, and here comes this fire hero. But so that happens a lot. But I do think that they really make a point to not all the heroes are, I don't want to say pretty. They're not all aesthetically pleasing, I think is a great word. Because they, like I said, sometimes they're just like weird, or like they've got, a weird thing on their face, or they're invisible, or
they're a bird.
Or they're a bird, yeah. So it's like, I think that they really go over the top with their powers, and their powers are very specific to whatever's going on with the plot for them or for that story. Whereas I think powers for Western media tend to be fairly generic, and then we just kind of build our stories around, we know what they can do, and so our stories that we know are always going to kind of revolve around that, so we know that Superman is going to do something where he's got to have strength and use his laser eyes. We know that whatever Batman's doing is going to involve technology. Whereas with My Hero, you can kind of be surprised because, oh, this is happening here. Well, that's okay. We've got this guy with this power back here who can turn into a truck and run people over or something. Like, so it was weird to get into it first, because I was just like, what are they doing? These outfits are so weird. They have these weird powers, but it really got interesting after a while. So once you just kind of accepted that it's not going to be your standard flying brick, it kind of got, exciting to see what they're going to come up with next.
Sure, definitely. What about you, Sophia?
I agree with Krista, and I think as she was speaking and everything was kind of like hitting home, I think a huge difference too in the way that Eastern media treats superpowers and Western is like Western superhero media, they get their powers, and most of their tribulations tend to be either just a strict like triumph of good over evil, or it's like them proving their worthiness for their powers. Whereas in Eastern media, even going as far back as like Astro Boy, right? Like the first ever anime was a superhero anime, and it's more about the learning and the training and the like characters in Eastern media. When they get their powers, they were either born with them and they get awakened later, and then they still have to train and learn them, or if you're Astro Boy, this isn't a spoiler alert because it happens in the first 5 minutes of the first episode, you take your dad's car and you crash it and you die, and he turns you into a living cyborg superhero. And then the rest of the series is him, more or less, he's saving the day, but he's also running into all kinds of shady characters and people who would take advantage of him, and him learning to control his powers because he's too strong. It's like very Disney Hercules, like everything he touches breaks and people get mad at him, and he's got to like grow not only in his powers but also as a person. So I think that's the biggest difference that I could think of to answer that question.
Sure, definitely. What about you, Lou? Do you have anything to add to that?
Sophia's right. Is like, it seems like their powers grow with them, whereas in Western they just kind of have them and they're stagnant. But in anime and manga, it's like, oh, and now I have to learn how to do the finger shooty thing with the air in the
yeah.
And that kind of, we're doing a lot of comparisons. That kind of brings me to my next question. So we touched on a bunch of things that like anime does differently than our Western superhero stories. But do you think that any of these things are stuff that, we should see in, say, the Marvel Cinematic Universe or in DC Comics or something like that? Is there anything you would like to see sort of a Western sort of style superhero show adopt from anime? And feel free to get creative with this. You could talk about specific story beats. You could talk about, how they release the stuff, the style of artwork, so on and so forth. And let's start with Sophia.
Ooh.
Ooh, or not. Should I start with someone else?
No, I mean, I think a lot, as we're seeing Western media kind of bleed and inspire Eastern, I think we're also seeing a flip. I mean, Western superhero media, when it first came out, was pretty much like, here's super person doing super cool, super things. Nowadays, they're getting dark and they're getting gritty and people are dying and not coming back. Like, that has never been done before in comics. Pretty much everyone's died 100 times over, and that gets retconned later because this was a different alternate timeline or whatever, you know.
It's just temporary.
Brings everyone back. It's fine. Nothing ever. But in anime, like, even going back, like I said, to Astro Boy and pretty much ever since, when characters die, I mean, they just die, and that affects the characters around them forever. And we're starting to see that a lot in Western now, where, like, when they do die, they don't come back, and that's going to keep, I guess, that gritty, dark backstory. Like, we're starting to learn that you can't just grab your magic eraser and go back and pretend it never happened unless you start a new franchise. So I think that's a huge thing that they're picking up.
Yeah, let's make death more permanent in superhero stories, please. That is something I went off about on the How to Craft a Hero panel, and it's something I will stick by. What about you, Lou? How do you feel?
And this goes back to my, I don't particularly care about the action sequences. I would like to see them grow as people and with their powers, instead of just having, like Krista said, because they're already adults, they're like, oh, well, I don't need to evolve anymore as a person. No, you still do, because now you have powers. And you can't just be who you always were before. That's not how that works. And I'd like to see more of that in Western media.
Awesome. What about you, Krista?
I think for me, and I don't know if this is quite what you're looking for here, but I would love for Western superhero media to really kind of go the way that manga does. Because, like, for me, I don't really read comics as much as I would like to, because they are damn confusing to get into. Like, it's just like there's always there's like this arc, and then there's this arc over here, and then you got to go back and find this. Oh, but there is this special volume here, and I'm like in the comic book store, and like, what's happening? I don't know what to pick. But with manga, you just like start here, volume 1, and then you just go to the end. So I really wish, like, I know that we have graphic novels and collections and stuff like that with Western comics, but I really wish that they would kind of adopt that system, and maybe not even like change over completely, but just do a series or just try it out, or just something where it's like, okay, here is this story, this is collected here, and this goes to this is what's next, and then this is what's next, and then so I guess, when you have the same properties that you've been working with for decades, maybe that might make it difficult to do that. But it's just, I feel that comics are just incredibly confusing to get into. As much as I would love to read them, I really just don't, because I don't know where to start. Like, if I go in there and I hear about something that's really cool and I go in to get it, oh, well, that one's on back order now because we've already moved on to issue 4. So I can special order you issue 1 through 3. It's like, oh, forget it. Like, I want to read it right now with the instant gratification, but I can't get that because, like, those floppies are already gone. So I just really wish that they would kind of do something where they would make it a little easier for the average reader to kind of get into, and just more collected graphic now manga style type booklets for readers to have to really kind of start reading comics. I think that would really help to kind of expand the audience for them, and just really just something new that they could try.
Oh yeah, and speaking as a librarian, who has had to one of my jobs is to buy the comic books for adults. The fact that there are collections doesn't necessarily make it any easier, because you'll get these situations where someone's like, I want to read Spider-Man, and they'll like current Spider-Man, and you have to like bring them over, being like, okay, you want to start off with this particular volume, but the next volume there's going to be a crossover event, so you're only going to get like a piece of the story, because the other stories are collected in all of these other volumes, and this particular crossover event, if you want to read more of it, and then the regular story picks up. And sometimes if you want to read like a specific author or artist, it doesn't even start at volume 1, and then there are also a million volume ones. And yeah, just it is really, I think comics are sometimes designed to be difficult to get into, and it's so much easier when you have like manga where you just start with volume 1. Imagine that.
Yeah.
And now, like going off of what you and Krista were saying, I mean, like look at Naruto. They're realizing that just because this group of characters' story is done doesn't mean you can't keep banking on the franchise, but instead of recycling the characters at the same age, they're just like, by the way, like here's the sequel, they're a little bit older and they have children, or here's side stories 10 years after that. So it's all very linear.
Yes.
Go back and be like, okay, where does this fit back in the story? Blah blah blah. What is this crossover? What's going on? You can just follow all the way through till the grave.
Well, and with Marvel, even though they have the alternate universes, they also have like 5 different Spider-Mans. Like there are 5 different people who become Spider-Man, which is great. But come on, guys.
Yeah, it can be confusing. So that's definitely my thing. I would love if they were to get some sort of collection or just some sort of linear project and say, here is this to this, and that would just be great.
Yeah, I agree. So we have a couple more questions coming in. So I believe actually Sophia talked earlier about, sort of darkness coming into certain anime. So here's the question sort of about, I guess, age appropriateness. Okay, question. I have to admit, I hear anime and my knee-jerk reactions think of Saturday cartoons for kids. And I know that's not the case. But how do you think anime/manga appeals to audiences of all ages? Let's start with you on this, Lou, on this one.
It's a tough question. I think because they don't just deal with issues that are necessarily age appropriate. Like with My Hero, especially, they deal with the bullying issue, which no matter what age you are, you know a bully. I don't care how old you are, you know some bully. They're at work, they're at the coffee shop being nasty, they're there. And with Sailor Moon, there's also like just growing up, which also, again, we all evolve all the time, even more adults. So it's like, I just think it's the topics, not necessarily the ages of the characters. And I understand that because I come from a family where everybody thought that, Sailor Moon was like a kid's show. And I was like, I mean, yes, but also no. Also no. It's the bright colors and it's because it's animated, everyone just assumes, but I've never seen Attack on the Titan, but you guys were talking about Attack on the Titan earlier, and I know that that's very graphically violent. Not at all for children. So.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. Like you get a show like My Hero that's definitely appealing from sort of an all ages audience. And then you get Attack on Titan, which is not. But what about you, Krista? How do you think that sort of like to combat the stereotype that like, anime, that's cartoons, right? That's just for children, huh?
Well, I think what needs to happen is that people need to accept that just because something is animated doesn't automatically mean child friendly. So that's something that, in Western media, since we only really have Saturday morning cartoons and the other cartoons that we have, like The Simpsons and, I can't even think of the names right now. Those are like the edgy adult cartoons. So it's either Saturday morning cartoons for kids or edgy, adult cartoons where they're cussing and saying weird stuff. So those are your 2 options. Whereas with anime, it's animated. Yes, there might be younger characters, but like she was saying, the storylines are much more adult. So you have to make sure, I think, to possibly introduce, someone to a show that is more of an adult storyline. So, give them recommendations for something. Maybe don't start off with something that's like super, kid friendly or geared towards kids. Like, Death Note, for example, like that's not a child's show at all, but it's animated. So maybe, like, hey, do you like, thrillers? Do you like mysteries? Try Death Note. So maybe just try to kind of give recommendations for something like that they might want to watch to see if that would be something that they would be interested in. And then from there, they might kind of start, learning about different animations and seeing if there's something they could be interested in and finding topics that they like. But definitely, I think trying to show them something that's definitely specifically for adults. I maybe might not start with Attack on Titan because it's got a lot of body horror in it. And if you're not ready for that, don't watch it. So probably just something, Death Note is an adult show, but it's not graphically violent, is where it's really cerebral. So that might be something that they might want to try. But other than that, I think there's just people just have to, be open-minded and try something. So.
Open-minded and try something. That's difficult for some people.
That's true.
It's funny you mentioned like the really edgy sort of American adult cartoons. Sometimes I think the reason why they are so edgy is to differentiate themselves, to say like this is not for kids, so we're almost going to go over the top with the content. Sophia, do you have anything to add on to that?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said, and I also think there's this art to storytelling that can be achieved with animation versus live action or other methods. I mean, everything in animation is very deliberate. Everything is plotted, planned, nothing's an accident. There's no accidents in animation. And it's also safe. When you're watching something animated, there's kind of like that barrier, like that cognitive dissonance that because you're not watching real people, I mean, like, would you watch Attack on Titan if it was live action and really realistic? With people?
No, I've heard those are terrible, actually, those movies. So,
could you watch that regularly and be, I mean, some people are, and be like a normal functioning human being, with nothing wrong upstairs? Or can you watch it animated and it's got the story to go along with it that draws you in? At the end of the night, you can still go to sleep because it was all a cartoon, and, just the way it can tackle topics that makes it safe for people. Because you're not actually watching real people die. You're watching drawn characters.
Yeah, it would be like watching a horror movie every week. And I think that would be a lot to, to deal with.
Yeah, I watched a show recently where like, you had a guy in a fight and his like fingers are falling off and stuff like that. And I'm like, this is pretty dark. But hey, because it's animated, as you mentioned, Sophia, it does give you kind of a separation from the level of content there. And I have another question coming from the audience that's relevant. So we talked about live action a lot, and we mentioned Attack on Titan, which had a live action adaptation, and Krista mentioned Death Note. So the question is, do you think manga would translate well to live action? And if so, which one would be your dream to see? And I feel like live action adaptations of anime kind of have a bad reputation. But are there any ones that you've seen that you enjoyed, or are there any ones that you would like to see? Let's start off with you, Krista.
I don't think that I've seen any live action ones. I can't think of off the top of my head. I don't think I've seen any. I know that they do definitely have a bad reputation, which is kind of why I tend to not want to see one. But I would love to see one that's really produced well, not just from like a small company, just like really kind of made for the fans, something that's meant to be, like that big summer blockbuster with like a real big movie company behind it. I would love to see that. And then of course, now that we have, so many special effects abilities and CGI and things like that, then you can really bring all those special effects, to life. Whereas before, it's going to look pretty cheesy if you were doing this back in the 80s, because we didn't have, stuff that like we have now. So being, a Sailor Moon, nerd from forever, I would love to see Sailor Moon get that first big budget, trilogy or whatever. I think that would be awesome. I would love to see that. I would love to see the magical transformations. I think it would bring in a huge audience because there's so many people who've been Sailor Moon fans, from kids, up till now. And then with the reboot of the Sailor Moon Crystal, it brought in new fans, and it's an older property that a lot of people know. So I think it would be something good to start with, and then that might be something that can lead into more being done, and then we could maybe move into like we've got our whole Western superhero genre. That might be something that we could move into having. As well, and I think Sailor Moon could be one that would possibly be able to kick it off, I think.
All right, Sophia, how do you feel? Live action Sailor Moon or any other thing you'd like to see?
I don't know. It's funny that this came up because just this morning I was watching the Naruto stage play where they adapted like the first 27 episodes for...
What is this? I have not heard of this.
It is a huge, huge trend in Japan to take like fan favorite animes and mangas or really successful ones and turn them into, I mean, you've probably heard of the amusement parks and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But they have this love affair with like musicals and stage plays. Like there's Sailor Moon musicals. There was an Inuyasha musical or stage play that just came out like a couple years ago. I mean, it's huge over there.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the equivalent would be like our Disney movies being turned into Broadway musicals, and they're big productions and they're great. And then you get Death Note, and Netflix takes it and smashes it over and over into the ground, and then it's like, here you go. Hope Willem Dafoe's enough for you to sit through an hour and a half of this crap. So I'm pretty jaded to the idea of live action adaptations at this point, at least I think by a Western studio, especially after Dragon Ball and Speed Racer, and I think I've repressed the rest. Having said that, I think if there was going to be a true like Hollywood studio adaptation, I don't know if a lot of the Sailor Moon stuff would translate well. I think a lot of stuff that works in anime and manga becomes really cheesy when they try to bring it to life. And then when they try to give it the gritty realism, you start to lose the magic. But Cooley Cooley would probably be my choice for a really solid Hollywood movie, just because it is so ridiculous. And so it's not that deep. There's no deep, like Death Note, this struggle of power between the anti-hero and the guy that's supposed to be the good guy who might also be the bad guy. It's just like this ridiculous nonstop circus of this dysfunctional family and the crap that starts happening to them. And I think that would translate really well.
That could be so trippy.
It would be so trippy. And I feel like who did Scott Pilgrim? If they did it,
Edgar Wright.
It would be amazing. Like, or any shoujo manga could probably translate pretty well if you just took the story. And they do that a lot for K-pop, or not K-pop, dramas, yes. But as far as like superhero or action adventure anime mangas go, I'm too jaded, so I can't really suggest it.
It's interesting you mentioned more of like the shoujo aspect, because I think probably the only really live action sort of adaptation I enjoyed was Nana, which was adaptation of a josei manga, which is like for young women. And that was, very much sort of a slice of life, people trying to get ahead in the music industry and stuff like that. And I just watched because one of my favorite singers happened to be starring in it, and I thought it actually was really well done. But going back on, I feel like we have one vote for live action Sailor Moon and one vote against live action Sailor Moon. So Lou, you are the deciding vote. You are going to determine if we're going to get a live action Sailor Moon.
Done live action Sailor Moon, and it was awful.
Ooh. Oh no. Okay. So no.
We're going to forget about those.
It was so bad. I think it could be done well. I just don't know that they would ever do it well. You know what I mean? Like I don't know that they do it well. But Death Note, they did do a stage play up, which was actually really good. The music was really good. And Sophie had mentioned K-dramas, and I know that some C-dramas actually, and I've talked to Nancy about this before. You guys have seen The Untamed on Netflix. What's that? It started off as an animated, it started off as a web novel, and then it became an animated series, and then they turned into live action, and that actually came out really well, and I think if they did something like that, it could work. But I think the anime I would like to see done is Dr. Stone. I think that would be really cool.
All right. Good answers. We have another question in. And this person really wants to know the answer. So how do you feel about Western properties being turned into anime? So like an anime version of X-Men, the Fantastic Four, or Iron Man. Is it doing itself any favors, or is this doomed to fail? And I have no idea who I'm on, so let's start off with Krista.
I don't know if they're asking if we like the ones that have already been made, because X-Men does have an anime. I don't know about Iron Man and Fantastic Four, but X-Men does have an anime. And Batman has one, which was just bananas, but I loved it. But X-Men has an anime, and I think they did two. I'm kind of almost finished watching one of them. There's like a team one, and there's a Wolverine one. The animation style I thought was gorgeous. I think it's really pretty. The beginning opening sequence which unfortunately it was Dark Phoenix, but at least it was only 5 minutes and then they moved on. But it was just really well done. It was really pretty. So I really enjoyed that. The voice actors I thought were fine. I really enjoyed those. The Batman one, since it was so stylized, as I was watching it, it was kind of, I felt like I could tell I was watching something instead of being immersed in the story. I kept thinking I'm watching something because it was so stylized and specific. And but I love the story. I thought it was really well done. Once you kind of let go of the looking at the different style of the animation style, you can really kind of get into it. So I wouldn't mind seeing more of it. That might be something that they could do to really give some characters who don't tend to really get, their cartoon series or their cartoon movies. That might be something they could work with. And Iron Man, I don't know if I would go with Iron Man for an anime. I would probably pick someone who has more of maybe an outlandish story, but it's not as well known. Or just to pick a fan favorite of my own, I might do Midnighter and Apollo, because their style of the comics from the Authority kind of looks like, and some of the issues kind of look like anime. So maybe that could be something. And since it tends to be more, I don't want to say adult, but like it's more graphic, I think. So that might lead to more to anime for those characters. But definitely, I would like to see it. I mean, I'm never going to say no to more animation.
All right, awesome. What about you, Sophia? Do you have any thoughts either on the Western superheroes that have already been turned into anime, or are there any Western superheroes that you would like to see in anime, or is it just a terrible idea all around?
I don't know. I can't really speak to it because I haven't watched. I think the only Western property I watched turn into an anime was the Halo miniseries. So I can't.
Okay.
If it's not a Western anime to begin with, like Ruby or Avatar, I can't really speak to it. But if this is the Uno reverse of anime being turned into Western, and then the Uno reverse of that, I think it depends on its roots. Because Miraculous Ladybug was actually meant to be an anime, like a 2D anime. They did a OVA or whatever you call it, and it was all set, ready to go. And then the marketing heads were like, nah, make it 3D. It's going to sell more merchandise. Will be great. So it's a French-Korean venture, but mostly French. So it technically is Western. And they are now turning it, because of the success of the show, even though it was scrapped as an anime, they're turning it into a manga. And now there's been a push to go back to the original anime that was supposed to be like a young adult, new adult type series and make that happen. So I think that's going to translate really well. And from what I've seen from the manga so far, it has. But that's also because it was originally concepted as an anime, even as a Western property. So I don't know. I don't know if I could see an already established Western hero be given an anime and have it translate, because it's going to be missing some of that cultural nuance that you get in anime.
So no Tony Stark and Max, or anything like that.
I mean, Western anime style, I guess it would work, but if they go full Toei Animation Studios gets in on it, I feel like some stuff might get get crossed. Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to do more research.
All right. What about you, Lou? How do you feel about either, the already existing anime or any existing superheroes we have getting an anime?
So I haven't seen any of our Western superheroes get turned into anime, but I think we should. I 100% think we should. And the reason why I think we should is because, and I haven't seen Teen Titan, but my brother has seen it and he says it's amazing. But Teen Titan had this issue where they started making it and then they stopped making it because the audience was mostly young girls, and they decided they couldn't sell merchandise to young girls that had superheroes on it. I saw the eye roll. It was collective. And I feel like that wouldn't be such an issue if it was anime, because it just wouldn't. I mean, there's so much merchandise that's My Hero Academia that's geared towards young girls and women, and it just wouldn't be as big of an issue, because I feel like in Japan, they're just like, I mean, it's merchandise and we'll sell it. And whoever buys it, buys it. We don't care. But they found out that girls, they didn't think girls were going to buy action figures. And I was like, they buy Barbie dolls. It's the same thing. I mean, come on, guys. It's the same.
That's a really good point. And the hero I thought the most, actually, that I thought would work really well in anime is Ms. Marvel. Just because her powers and sort of like, you know, the ways that she can stretch herself and grow and stuff like that, I feel would work very well in animated for me. She's getting the live action show coming up, which is great. And I'm really excited to see that. But yeah, over in Japan, they don't seem to have the same sort of fear of, you know, making all, like, there's so much anime that is directed toward girls and women. There are, you know, entire genres, you know, shoujo and such, you know, directed to girls and women. And so maybe if, you know, we would have more, you know, superhero shows directed towards girls and women, if we let, you know, Japan have a little more of our IP. But yeah, that's a really interesting point. All right, so let's finish things off with a fun one. So if you could have any power set from any existing anime or manga, what would it be? And feel free to interpret this question however you would like. Like, if you want to have something you think will be genuinely useful to you in your real life, go ahead, pick that. But if you want to pick something wild and crazy, also pick that. So Lou, let's start off with you.
So I think I would want Uraka from My Hero's float power because, I mean, I like to rearrange my furniture and that would be really helpful. And also, she can fly, sort of. I mean, yeah. So I think I'd want her float power.
Yeah, that is definitely, as someone that has done a bit of like furniture assembly and stuff like that lately, I think that would come in very much in useful. What about you, Krista?
I'm gonna have to say that I would like to have Todoroki's powers, and the reason for that is because, well, yeah, I think I gave it away. One is because I'm always cold. I'm originally from St. Louis. I moved to Texas because I hated being cold, and now I'm back in St. Louis, and so I'm like so scared for this winter that's going to come up. So I would love to have some firepower to just kind of keep myself warm. But then I would also love to have his icy power because I have hot flashes. So, you know, that way I can just kind of cool myself off. So if I could have both powers to just kind of regulate my temperature or do whatever I need to do to either make myself warm or make myself cold, that'd be perfect.
Oh, totally. I feel like we don't see like the practical uses of Todoroki's powers nearly as much as we could. Like, it's all about the family angst and like the big impressive ice walls or whatever. But we need to learn more about like how he prepares his tea and stuff like that.
Thinking that.
Yeah, that's like really useful powers.
He doesn't make enough. Yeah, he doesn't make enough slushies. He doesn't roast enough marshmallows. I mean, his powers are wasted.
Exactly. So what about you, Sophia?
I think I'd have to go with Inuyasha's powers that he has as a half demon. I will like stub my toe and cry for hours. That dude gets a hole blasted through his torso once an episode, and he's totally fine. Go through my day without injuring myself, or if I do injure myself, it's gonna be healed in like 2 minutes. That would make my life so much easier.
Oh, definitely. That resilience is very useful. I know for me, if I could have anyone's powers, I would love to have Card Captor Sakura's powers because she has all the cards. So she has all of the powers of the cards, which I feel would be very versatile. But that's it. We're coming to the end. So it makes it a perfect time for everyone to plug their stuff. Krista, where can we find you online?
My website is KristaTomlinson.com. You can also find me on all social media, pretty much as Krista Tomlinson. Some of the names might be a little bit different, but if you just type in Krista Tomlinson, I'll pop up. I'm most often on Twitter, is where I hang out the most, and then also I'm on Facebook after that. So those are the two places if you want to come hang out with me and let me talk about Untamed or Sailor Moon or anything like that. My Hero, Attack on Titan. I'm always tweeting about something. At least every time I'm doing live tweets or just Saturday, I just wake up in the morning and say, you know, I'm going to talk about this today. So you can find me on Twitter at Krista T Romance is my Twitter handle. And then of course I have my first superhero romance, Blaze, Our City Guardian #1, which is now available on Amazon, NKU, and paperback.
Awesome. What about you, Sophia?
I am pretty much Sophia Han Books everywhere. So SophiaHanBooks.com. I spend most of my time on Instagram. It's Sophia Han. with an F, not a PH. And then Han, like Catherine Hahn from WandaVision. My first superhero romance isn't out yet, but you can pre-order it on Amazon. It's called Always Have, Always Will. It's a super angsty, love square, mistaken identities mess. And it's only 99 cents all this week for the Convention of Heroes.
Awesome. And we'll finish things off with you, Lou.
So you can find me on my website, lewinprogress.com, or Instagram usually, which is lou.wilham.com. And I do have Twitter and I do have Facebook, but I'm not on there quite as frequently as Instagram because I love taking my pictures. And my first superhero book comes out tomorrow. It's Villainous. I'm really excited. Yay!
It's really good. I've read it.
She did. Lots of people like it. And it has a lot of LGBT plus representation. So yay for that too. And that's it.
All right, and just to finish things off, my name is Nancy O'Toole again. I don't think I actually introduced myself at the beginning. Nancy O'Toole, I write the Red and Black series. Most recent book is Past and Future. And I also host One for All on my Hero Academia podcast. If you'd like to listen in on that, we are currently making our way through season 4 right now. That is it for tonight. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we hope that you continue to enjoy the Convention of Heroes.
Bye.
Bye.